Order, order. We start with question as Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Alicia Kearns.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, well...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government recognises the importance of ensuring UK businesses respect human rights throughout their operations. We continue to keep this area under review and will work with our international partners to understand the most effective ways to tackle forced labour in supply chains.
I thank my honourable friend for his answers, but companies with well-documented links to Uyghur slave labour are dumping their goods here in the UK. Why? Because the US has introduced the Uyghur Forced Labour Act and the EU has done similarly. Last month I wrote with 43 members of this House and 32 human rights organisations calling for import controls on solar panels. So will the Minister agree to kindly meet with me to discuss this and to finally bring forward measures to clean up our supply chains?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for her question. The Government is clear that British businesses and solar developers should not stand for receiving solar panels from companies linked to forced labour, and we've already taken steps to address this issue through the Procurement Act and the Modern Slavery Act. In addition, the forthcoming UK Solar Roadmap will outline a clear roadmap to reach our solar deployment ambitions, including energy security. I want to reassure my honourable friend that sustainable solar supply chains will form a central chapter of that roadmap, and I'll be very happy to either arrange a meeting with my honourable friend or arrange a meeting or have a meeting with her.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, question number 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the House agreed a government amendment to the Horizon Exoneration Bill to include convictions in Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Executive faced unique challenges in delivering its own legislation in a timely manner, including Northern Ireland in the bill, ensures that postmasters there are not left behind and receive exoneration and access to compensation on a UK-wide basis.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I put on record my thanks to the Minister? He's been very industrious, assiduous, and he's been a great champion for the postmasters and postmistresses across all of this United Kingdom. There's not a person in this House doesn't have great respect for him. But further to Monday's business in the House regarding the Northern Ireland provision for the Horizon Bill that the Minister has referred to, brought by my colleagues Ian Paisley Jr., member for North Antrim, and the member for East Antrim, Sammy Wilson, could the Minister outline a timeline so that postmasters and postmistresses across all of Northern Ireland can see the end of their reputational damage, financial damage and heartache caused by the disgraceful operation of this scheme? Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker.
Can I thank him for his kind words? It's always a pleasure to work with him and his colleagues. It's our intention that the legislation would clear both houses by July. Obviously, not all those things are within our gift, but should that be the case, which we fully expect to be the case, the convictions will be quashed in July and compensation redress will be paid from August of this year.
So Desmond Swin.
Lisa.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 3 and 12 together. UK exports were £862 billion in the 12 months to February. UK services exports reaching a record £472 billion in the same period, an increase of 10%, £42 billion. Businesses, including SMEs, can access my department's wealth of export support at great.gov.uk. This includes the Export Academy with over 18,000 registrations, our 160 international trade advisors who help about 6,000 SMEs each year, and 388 export champions across every part of the UK.
So Desmond.
Are we really the 4th largest exporter in the world?
I'm very pleased to tell my right honourable friend that we are, and there are many, many more good statistics which he will find in the publication which my department produced at the end of January, which has further good news stories on UK exports. The UK is a global exporting superpower and the world's second biggest services exporter. In fact, services exports with the EU are at a record high and have increased by 36% since 2018.
Andrew Jones.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend has just detailed really very encouraging export data, and much of that is due to the hard work of SMEs. Could you give a bit more information about what support is available specifically to SMEs grow and export more of their products and services?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. This year, the department has declared the year of the SME. We know that quite a lot of the time people hear news that just sounds like it's about big business, but SMEs are the ones that employ most of the people in the UK. So we have a network of international trade advisors, the 160 that I just mentioned, the export support services, but there are also schemes like Help to Grow, a management course. 5,290 participants have completed that by November, and we also have a business support service which provides support to around 30,000 people in England every year.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And further to the comments there about SMEs, in light of the termination of the Trade Show Access programme, which supported SMEs in gaining that international market exposure, could I ask the Secretary of State specifically what support and what is the government's strategy to provide equivalent or enhanced support to ensure that UK food products remain competitive within the EU markets?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Yes, we do know that a lot of people are disappointed that we closed the trade show programme, but the reason why was because it was a pilot programme and it didn't yield the successes that we had hoped. So we are investing in those things that are providing success and that are demonstrating real benefits. The Export Academy is one of them, the Export Support Service, like I mentioned, and those international trade advisors, and many of them will have expertise in food and drink. And if he writes to us with a specific case, it's something that we'd be very happy to help with.
Shannon Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately for members opposite, and more importantly for the country, the OBR's recent figures, which I know the Secretary of State struggles with, show that on her watch, exports have dropped and are set to have declined again this year. If she does have a moment to spare from her leadership campaign, she might read the landmark report from Aston University last week on the significant boost for British exports that a veterinary agreement could deliver for British farmers and the agri-food industry. Why won't she pursue an agreement that's so obviously in Britain's national interest?
Mr. Speaker, the OBR puts out lots of figures and the opposition will cherry-pick the ones that they think will be most helpful, thinking that we haven't done our homework. I would encourage him to look at the OBR's forecasts for growth for this country, which are very high, and I would ask him which specific period is he referring to. He should look at what is happening to exports overall, not just periods, including COVID, which actually explain why we have had some drops in good exports.
Thomas.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I did actually ask her about the veterinary agreement, and no one on these benches, I suspect, will be surprised that she hasn't shown any interest in a trade agreement that would actually help British farmers. So let me ask her this. According to the House of Commons Library, under the last Labour government, exports rose by 55%. But since then, exports have risen by only 32%. Isn't the truth that British exporters always do better under a Labour government?
That is absolute rubbish. It is not true. And what I would say is that the veterinary agreement that he's talking about is one that would create dynamic alignment with the EU. That is not what this country voted for in 2016. We are delivering what the people voted for. Yes, there will be difficulties. We're sorting them out. It's time that they moved on and actually accepted the will of the people.
Number 5, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for the valuable work he is doing as the Prime Minister's trade envoy to the Republic of Korea, and I look forward to his upcoming visit there. He is famous for his timely interventions, Mr. Speaker. Detailed round 2 discussions on an upgraded FTA took place in London from the 18th to 22nd of March, which provided an opportunity to conclude the exploratory phase of negotiations. We now look forward to text-based negotiations in round 3, which is due to take place in Seoul from the 24th of June.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for that answer ahead of my visit to Korea next week? Does he agree that the Indo-Pacific region offers huge opportunities for global growth, particularly as it is home to something like half of the world's middle-class consumers over the coming decade, and that therefore upgrading this agreement is likely to bring huge benefits to the UK?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. The Indo-Pacific is a vital part of the world for the UK and forms right at the centrepiece, of course, of our strategy going forward diplomatically and in terms of trading ties. He's right that the Republic of Korea will play a vital role in that. The recently signed Downing Street Accord with Korea outlines the breadth and depth of the ongoing relationship. And also, we look forward, of course, to CPTPP coming into effect later this year, and we look forward to seeing if the Republic of Korea will apply.
Brandon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the honourable gentleman does a very effective job in South Korea, and I visited there myself with the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee a couple of years ago and saw those opportunities. But there is some concern about transparency around the use of trade envoys. Can he confirm to the House that no trade envoy under this government has ever demanded and been given the use of a house for their exclusive use?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in fact, I think you slightly jumped the gun. I think the next question on the order paper relates to trade envoys. Can I just say how proud that we are of the cross-party trade envoy programme, which I think you will hear about in a moment. We think they do an excellent job, a good value-for-money job for the United Kingdom in promoting trade in a number of key markets.
Sir Christopher Brown.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's trade envoys provide invaluable support in progressing the UK's trade and investment agenda in 61 markets across the world. The travel costs incurred by the Prime Minister's trade envoys were, for the financial year 21-22, £63,566, for 22-23, £226,014, and for 2023-24 they were £232,325. These costs are for flights and accommodation when the official British residence was unavailable and other sundry expenses.
Sir Christopher, right.
Well, there's a great deal of murkiness about the trade envoys, because I note that in answer to my honourable friend for Cardiff West, the Minister point-blank refused to deny that at least one trade envoy has explicitly asked for the exclusive use of a house whilst acting as a trade envoy. The Minister has point-blank refused to publish the breakdown of all the trade envoys and their costs on absolutely spurious reasons. We're not, if you go on a select committee visit to South Korea, for instance, all the details of that cost are published, but not if a trade envoy goes. So how can we possibly judge whether the £750 million or so, £1,000 that have been spent so far in the last 3 years have been well spent? Do we know, is there any accountability whatsoever, or isn't this really just a means of providing sinecures for people that they like in the government?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think there's a lot of bluster there, and not a few accusations that I think he may wish to try and stack these things up a little bit. But look, in terms of it is a cross-party programme, it is not a government-only programme. Many Labour MPs, Labour peers and others are members of the programme. Mr. Speaker, gifts and hospitality are already published in departmental registers. And if I might, Mr. Speaker, two qualifications for the cross-party role are diplomacy and discretion, which might explain why not everybody has been asked to do the role.
Neil Lambert.
For 7, Mr. Speaker.
Pardon me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my department works closely with the Scottish Government and its agencies to promote Scottish products in overseas markets. We've recently delivered our Made in Scotland, Sold to the World Exporter Roadshow in Glasgow. On top of that, I'm pleased to say that the PG Paper Company, a brilliant Scottish business, has just received an award in this year's Made in the UK Sold to the World Awards.
Neil Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The value of Scotland's oil exports to the EU reached £9.4 billion in 2023, with total oil exports up 14.7%. So the value of oil as an export commodity cannot be overstated. Balancing those billions in exports against a modest £80 million investment that would increase Grangemouth's profitability threefold, secure its long-term future and save Grangemouth from closure. Does the Secretary of State accept that it would be absurd for Scotland to be the only major oil-producing nation without a refinery capacity? And will she agree to meet with me to discuss this matter further, given that the Scottish Government are otherwise occupied?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He is right to raise this issue. It is something that we are concerned about, and the UK and Scottish governments are working together to understand all the options for the future of the refinery and working closely on the issue through forums such as the Grangemouth Future Industries Board. But I'm very happy to meet with him, as are other ministers, to discuss further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that whilst there has been great progress in promoting and increasing the export of traditional Scottish products such as whisky, we also need to support new businesses such as the one in South Lanarkshire, which is keen to expand electronic vehicle infrastructure into the United States?
Yes, he is quite right. Our exports need to be about the future, not just about the traditional industries like Scottish whisky, which are a pride of Scotland and of the UK. Electric vehicles are one of the ways that we are going to hit our net zero target, and this is an area that the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero is focused on. I support in business and trade, and if there's anything specific that he has that we can look into for his constituency, we'd be very happy to help.
Stephen Kinnett.
Question 8, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government's £500 million grant will safeguard steelmaking in Port Talbot, 5,000 jobs in the company and thousands more in supply chains across the UK, which would have otherwise been under serious threat. Mr. Speaker, Transition Board, with a further £100 million of funding, 80 million from the UK Government and 20 million from Tata, will also support those affected. This funding will help supply chain businesses strengthen and diversify their customer base, creating sustainable jobs and business opportunities in Port Talbot and the wider region.
Speaker, when it is finally introduced, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism will provide a vital tool to ensure that British steelworkers have a level playing field so that they can compete against heavily polluting steel industries in other parts of the world. But recent media reports have indicated that India is lobbying Number 10 for an exemption from the UK CBAM. Does the Minister recognise that CBAMs can only work if they are comprehensive across all countries and sectors? And if you start giving exemptions here or there, the entire policy will unravel. And this is particularly important given that Tata's plan for Port Talbot is based on importing millions of tonnes of semi-finished product steel from India, a country which has significantly higher carbon intensity in the way that it produces its steel. So could the Minister come to the dispatch box now and just confirm that under no circumstances will India be given an exemption from the UK Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism? And a yes or no answer would suffice. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I was pleased to visit his constituency as part of my first round of visits in this new role. I look forward to meeting him again later this month. He's absolutely right that the government is committed to making sure that UK decarbonisation efforts lead to a true reduction in global emissions. The CBAM policy is still being designed, the consultation is ongoing, and I would certainly recommend that he contributes to that consultation.
Hollinrake.
You, Mr. Speaker. Residents in Scunthorpe are particularly concerned about steel supply chain jobs related to virgin steel making. My honourable friend's predecessor was very clear from the dispatch box that obviously we need a place for virgin steel making in the UK and that place was in Scunthorpe. Can he now confirm that he agrees with her and that nothing is off the table in his negotiations with British Steel?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend for her question. I was also pleased to visit her constituency to meet steel workers and British Steel management during my visits last month. I know she is a passionate and dedicated champion for her community and for steel workers there. I look forward to meeting her again next week ahead of the Secretary of State's visit to her constituency and discussing these matters and others.
Minister Sargent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No commitment to virgin steel from the Minister, then. What a shame. I welcome the Minister to his place, and I note that he visited Port Talbot Steelworks last week, but he failed to meet any actual steelworkers, of course. So instead of avoiding discussing the government's plan for £500 million of taxpayers' money for the loss of nearly 3,000 jobs, can the Minister please commit to meet some Port Talbot steelworkers, and can he publish his economic assessment of the impact of the UK losing his capacity to make virgin steel? Or is his actual plan to just keep his head down until the Prime Minister finally has the guts to call a general election and leave all of these problems piling up for somebody else?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This UK Conservative government has given more support to the steel sector than any government before it. And when I went to Port Talbot, I was pleased to meet steel workers and will continue to do so. I also sit on the Transition Board and will continue to support steel in South Wales and all the opportunities that this sector will bring.
Daniel Cootenson.
Question 9, sir.
You don't understand.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a great champion of international trade as the Prime Minister's trade envoy for Mongolia. He'll be pleased to know that annual trade between the UK and the Caribbean Economic Community, CARICOM, in 2023 was £5.1 billion, up 11% in current prices on the previous year. In December 2023, I represented the UK at the inaugural Joint Council of our Economic Partnership Agreement, where I met with representatives of CARICOM and the Dominican Republic, collectively known as CARIFORUM, underlining the importance of our trading relationship and exploring opportunities to further boost trade.
Very grateful to my honourable friend for that answer. I speak as the chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for St Kitts and Nevis, Guyana, and also for the Caribbean. This is an extremely important region for the United Kingdom, one of the largest concentration of British overseas territories and Commonwealth nations in the world, with historic links with the United Kingdom. But the copy and paste that we have with them in trade, that we have carried over from the European Union, is not sufficient. And we need a more tailor-made specific trade agreement between the United Kingdom and CARICOM to ensure that some of those protectionist measures that the European Union imposed on our CARICOM friends can be rescinded. When will that happen?
Well, thank you, and I thank my honourable friend particularly for his engagement in the region, in St Kitts, the Caribbean as a whole, and Guyana, which remains very much in all of our minds at the moment, Mr. Speaker, given the situation on their borders. He's right to highlight the CARIFORUM trade deal. It is a deal which the UK values, and as I mentioned, we had the inaugural meeting of the body that is there to make sure that it has good effects on our trade with the Caribbean. I might suggest, Mr. Speaker, that I arrange a meeting between him and our Trade Commissioner, Jonathan Knott, who I'm sure would be delighted to meet with my honourable friend to discuss Caribbean trade possibilities still further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 10.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank my honourable friend for his questions and his work as one of our trade envoys to the Kingdom of Morocco. I know he's a true diplomat and the soul of discretion. We recently announced that we were raising the monetary thresholds that determine company size, reducing burdens on smaller businesses and removing low-value and overlapping reporting requirements. Around 13,000 medium-sized companies will be reclassified as small companies, and 100,000 small companies will be reclassified as micro-companies, saving small and medium-sized companies, around £145 million a year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I visit many small businesses in my constituency of Aylesbury, and I am always incredibly impressed by their spirit of entrepreneurship and the huge effort, the hard work that they put in to succeed. They want to be able to devote as much of their skill and their time as possible to finding new customers, selling more of their products and creating jobs, not to bureaucracy, to admin and to onerous regulation. As the true party of business, our Conservative government has already made great progress supporting business, as the Minister has just outlined. But what more can his department do to help these small and micro firms who are the engine of our economy?
Well, he's a real champion of small business, and we meet often to talk about these matters. And our government's policy, this government's policies, that have pushed the UK to third place in the OECD rankings for startups, third out of 39 countries. And we have a suite of programmes to help small businesses, most importantly access to finance with our Startup Loans Company, Growth Guarantee Scheme and Equity Investment Schemes, EIS, support and advice through our Help to Grow Management Suite, including our newly launched Help to Grow Management Essentials course, 2 hours of free online training for small businesses, removing barriers through non-financial reporting, as well as the monetary size thresholds. We're also consulting on increasing the employee size thresholds from 250 employees for a medium-sized company to 500, which will save medium-sized companies a further £150 million per year.
Shadow Minister Tam Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As with the despair and financial pressures faced by small businesses, the British Poultry Council recently reported that unreciprocated EU border checks have unfairly saddled UK exporters with £55 million a year in extra costs, while their EU counterparts pay absolutely nothing. So does the Minister not agree with me that this government's failure to negotiate a fair sanitary and phytosanitary agreement with the EU has directly undermined British businesses and exposed our exporters to severe competitive disadvantages?
Well, I'm surprised his question is put like that, because what we're trying to make sure here is a fair and level playing field for UK exporters as well as EU exporters. Of course, we need checks at the borders on that basis. It wouldn't be fair to UK producers if that was not the case. But I think what he's pushing for in a sanitary and phytosanitary agreement is what his honourable friend was pushing for, which is dynamic alignment with the EU, which would lock us into EU rules permanently. We don't believe that. We believe we have a bright future outside the European Union. What he would do is lock us back into the customs union and the single market.
Dr. Jamie Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK is a global hub for advanced manufacturing, and according to the OECD, the UK's manufacturing sector has had the fastest growth in the G7 since 2010. The importance of the sector was highlighted in the Manufacturing Technologies Association's recent True Impact report. Manufacturing contributed 217 billion of GVA to the UK economy in 2023 and plays an outsized role in the key drivers of growth, including accounting for over 40% of UK exports.
Dr. Jamie Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK does lead the way in areas like artificial intelligence, robotics and the Internet of Things, and these are important for our future, especially in manufacturing. So could the Minister please comment on how that's strengthening British businesses and how is that strengthening the British economy?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for this question. He is a strong champion for manufacturing and advanced technologies, and that is well known across this House. This government is also strongly committed to supporting R&D and innovation because they contribute significantly to our economic growth. In particular, industrial technologies such as robotics and AI are supporting manufacturing businesses to be more productive and more sustainable. And that's why the government has increased R&D investment to £20 billion per year and is expanding Made Smarter, our highly successful industrial digitisation programme for SMEs.
Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mainly because of this House's worship of the false idol of net zero, electricity costs to business in the UK are 4.5 times higher than those in China and 3 times higher than those in India. Can the Minister explain how manufacturing businesses in the UK can compete with this on world markets?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I hope he'll join me in welcoming the introduction of the British Industry Supercharger, which reduces electricity costs for major energy-intensive industries, and I hope they will benefit those in his constituencies and those across the country as well.
Sir Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A key sector of the manufacturing economy is the plastics industry, employing 155,000 people and with an annual turnover of £28.7 billion. Now, in July 2023, the UK Government began a consultation on the plastic packaging tax and the methodology behind it. Now, in February, some 14 organisations signed a joint letter to the Government urging the swift publication of that consultation. So when exactly does the Government expect to be able to respond to this long overdue consultation?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He is right that the UK plastics industry is highly important and contributed £8.2 billion to the economy last year. I'm aware of the consultation, which is led by the Treasury, and I'll make sure that he gets a reply.
Register.
Number 13, sir.
Mr. Speaker, over the last 2 years, UK-US trade has grown 35% from £230 billion to £311 billion, while shared investment between our two nations now totals over £1.1 trillion. In March, after the excellent work of our trade envoy, the Right Honourable Member for Bournemouth West, I signed a state-level arrangement with Texas. This means that UK businesses now have MOUs with 8 US states with a combined GDP equivalent to a quarter of the whole US economy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for that answer. I'm delighted to report that US company motorsport giant Andretti have shown a massive vote of confidence in the United Kingdom, taking 40,000 square feet of facility space in Buckinghamshire, with another 70,000 square feet on order, already employing over 100 people locally with high-tech jobs. This clearly opens up huge opportunities for automotive and motorsport supply chain businesses on both sides of the pond, including General Motors. So will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming Andretti to the United Kingdom in their bid to get on the Formula One grid? And what more can she do to ensure those automotive and motorsport supply chains can operate both sides of the Atlantic?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was delighted to see my honourable friend visit the opening of Andretti Global's new facility in Silverstone last month, and I'd like to wish them luck as they continue their preparations to enter Formula One. So this investment is another vote of confidence in the world-leading innovation that the UK has to offer. My honourable friend asks what more will they see. Andretti Global will specifically benefit from the MOU we have signed with Indiana, and this will enhance our trade relationship in key areas, including advanced manufacturing.
Patrick Grady.
Number 14.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 568 millilitre pint quality is one of several changes in pre-packed wine sizes that are expected to come into force on the 19th of September 2024, supporting the thriving UK wine sector by providing opportunities for innovation and greater choice. In light of these changes, Wine GB, who represent producers, said we welcome the chance to be able to harmonise still and sparkling bottle sizes, and we are happy to raise a glass to the greater choice that allows UK producers for domestic sales.
Really?
It's nowhere near as definitive as the press release his department put out on the 27th of December last year, which is still on the government website, with a headline, "Pints of wine stocked on Britain's shelves for the first time ever." Not will be stocked, not might be stocked, not could be stocked, not to be stocked. It implied that pints of wine were and are available to buy right now in shops across the UK. Will the government admit that the reality is there's been little to no demand or interest for the supposedly glorious Brexit benefit, and in fact it's entirely possible that pints of wine will never be stocked on UK shelves?
Brexit beat. Well, it's never difficult to distinguish the right honourable gentleman from a ray of sunshine, is it? Our wine industry is thriving. Over 900 vineyards across Great Britain. The UK wine industry produced 12.2 million bottles of wines in 2022. And our new powers, post-Brexit powers, provide new options, including new legislation which aligns existing sizes across still and sparkling pre-packed wine so that both can be sold in 200 millilitres and 500 millilitre quantities that we know there's good demand for.
Number 16, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, in March, the UK and New Zealand highlighted the importance of our environmental commitments at the first ever Environment Committee under our new free trade agreement. We continue to engage with New Zealand on implementing the environmental chapter and will monitor the proposed bill that she mentions during its passage through New Zealand's Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The New Zealand FTA entered into force on the 31st of May 2023, and it contains a commitment in Article 22 not to waive or otherwise derogate from or offer to waive or otherwise derogate from its environmental laws in a manner that weakens or reduces the protections afforded in that law. Is there not a danger that the fast-track approvals will erode these protections, and what steps will the government take to ensure that New Zealand absolutely upholds its commitments under the FTA?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for that question. And as I said, we will continue to monitor the passage of this proposed legislation. But look, I think she has to recognise the UK and New Zealand are incredibly like-minded in these areas, on climate, the environment, on clean growth. And the environment chapter we have is one of the most ambitious in any free trade agreement anywhere in the world. It absolutely breaks new ground for both the UK and New Zealand in supporting our shared climate and environmental goals, clean growth, and the transition to a net zero economy.
We come to topicals with Patrick Grady.
Topical 1.
Mr. Speaker, post office governance is a priority for the government, and I have said many times that it is vital we have the right people leading the organisation. That is why I am pleased to tell the House that on Wednesday I announced the appointment of Nigel Railton as the interim chair. Having previously been chief executive of Camelot, Nigel brings a wealth of experience transforming organisations, and I am confident that he is the right person to lead the post office through this period. Nigel Railton will take up his post as soon as possible, and he will be invited to give ministers his views on the future direction of the Post Office in due course.
Patrick Gray.
Mr Speaker, when will the government admit that its Brexit dream of people quaffing pints of wine and invoking the spirit of Churchill was always actually a fantasy, and in fact the reality is a Brexit nightmare of border checks, of reduced consumer choice and business closures?
Nonsense that this is something that reduces consumer choice. It actually increases consumer choice. I can't imagine why anyone would be complaining about the sale of pints of wine. If he doesn't like it, he doesn't have to buy it.
Therese Coffey.
Mr Speaker, I know that my right honourable and honourable friends have been looking into the closure of Kelsale Post Office, an outreach service in my constituency. We voted just through very recently, Mr Speaker, more money to subsidise the post office, including £50 million for rural branches. Can I ask my right honourable friend to make sure that that is published? Because I know the post office is trying to cut costs, but that shouldn't be at the cost of the customers in Kelsale.
Can I thank her for her work on this, and she's raised this important matter with me at meetings we've had earlier last month. We allocate £50 million for the uncommercial part of the network, and part of that should help services in her constituency. I know she's disappointed at the closure of the outreach service in Kelsale. There is an alternative permanent post office branch in Saxmundham, 1.3 miles away, but I'm very happy to continue the conversation between her and the post office to make sure she gets the services she needs in her constituency.
Minister Rushanara Ali.
Mr Speaker, shoplifting cost UK retailers £1.8 billion in 2023, the highest figures on record. The government's £200 shoplifting threshold has effectively decriminalised this offence, which is costing businesses dear. What discussions has the Minister had with the Home Secretary to scrap it, as Labour plans to do, so retailers and customers are protected and high street businesses can thrive?
Well, it is not true to say we decriminalise thefts under £200, and if she wants to know that, she needs to speak to the police officers and her local police constables, to say a chief constable, to make sure she understands how this works. I work very closely with the Home Office, the Policing Minister Chris Philp, to make sure that we have a retail crime action plan. This includes a vexatious offence in terms of more severe sentences for people who assault shop workers. We've got an action plan together. It's working well with the retailers. I'm very keen to see that she would support that plan.
Rushanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, it's not working, and the Minister and Secretary of State should take it seriously because it's damaging our high streets and it's causing huge concern up and down the country. He should go and meet those businesses. The Secretary of State should meet them and hear directly. Turning to another issue, Mr Speaker, we've seen 14 years of Conservative underinvestment in public infrastructure, the failure to provide certainty and the failure to get a grip on the economy. Business investment has also suffered. Had it matched the average investment levels of France, Germany and the US, our GDP would be nearly 4% higher today and boost wages by £1,250 a year. So can the Secretary of State outline how she plans to fix this gap that is crippling investment and what she will do to make sure businesses get the support they need so that we can get the economic growth that this country desperately needs after 14 years of underinvestment?
Mr Speaker, I remember a time when the Labour benches were telling everyone that we shouldn't invest in nuclear, and it is under this Conservative government that we are investing in nuclear infrastructure. That's only happened under Conservative governments. Infrastructure. She asks about the plan. I would remind her about the Global Investment Summit we had just in November, which raised nearly £30 billion in one day. No one is better than our current Prime Minister in delivering investment for this country. Business investment is rising, and it is rising because of the policies that he and the Chancellor have put in place, such as capital expensing.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yes, I was pleased to meet with a number of UK aerospace businesses demonstrating and showcasing facing extraordinary innovation right here in the United Kingdom, including Saffron, who have a significant base in Pitstone in my constituency. So can I ask my right honourable friend, what has her department done to ensure that we can increase aerospace exports?
I thank my honourable friend, who I know is a strong champion of aerospace exports in this House. Last year's autumn statement extended the aerospace technology programme budget by a further 5 years, an additional £975 million of new R&D funding from 2025 through to 2030. And as part of this vote of confidence in the UK civil space sector, our trade missions and trade promotion activities by my department and our embassies around the world continue to help companies win export contracts worth millions of pounds.
SNP spokesperson Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 2017, Boris Johnson claimed the UK was first in line for a post-Brexit trade deal with the United States. And while negotiations opened in May 2020, there's been no progress made since October of that year. When does the Minister expect to be able to deliver this alleged Brexit benefit? And what does the Minister think will arrive first? A trade deal with the US or pints of champagne to toast it with?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As everyone on these benches know, even if we had a trade deal with the US, he would be standing there telling us how he would be voting against it. The fact of the matter is that the US is not carrying out any free trade agreements with any country. There is nothing that we can do about that. So instead, we have been negotiating the deals with the states at an individual level, which I listed out, and just like the very last one, where the Governor of Texas came to the UK to sign a trade deal MOU between Texas and the United Kingdom. So our relationship with the US is going well. I talked about the exports increasing, trade increasing to $311 billion. Trade with the US is going well. We will continue to pursue a free trade agreement, but trade requires two parties in order to deliver.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Are ministers as concerned as I am about continued reports that Royal Mail are determined to move away from a 6-day service? In a large rural constituency like mine with an older population, people continue to rely on the Royal Mail for important communications. So can the Minister make clear that this is not the direction of travel that the Government wants to see Royal Mail go in?
Well, can I thank you for his question? We absolutely agree with his point. We've been very clear with Royal Mail and indeed with Ofcom, the regulator, that we want to see a continued 6-day service, and the Royal Mail and hopefully Ofcom will have heard what he said today and what we're saying today. The 6-day service must continue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Further to my honourable friend, the Honourable Lady for Upper Bands' question to the Prime Minister yesterday, with the Republic of Ireland now employing a form of border control, seemingly reinstating a hard border, what discussions have taken place regarding the ability for business vehicles to pass through the border with delays due to onerous checks by Garda Síochána and Republic of Ireland and EU border staff?
Well, Mr Speaker, of course the Government as a whole is monitoring this situation very, very closely. We have very good relations with the Government of the Republic of Ireland. I'll pass on his comments to the Cabinet Office and to the Foreign Office.
Ollie Membicroft.
Would it be acceptable if the UK became the only country in the G7 that couldn't make its own virgin steel?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She will know how committed this government is to the steel industry, but at the moment it is going through a transition. We do care about having primary steel making capacity in this country. That is something that we want to do, and we always want to, so that is something that we want to keep. But as she knows, even now we still import ore. I know that she is concerned about British steel and its future, and I will be visiting her constituency in Scunthorpe, and we will be able to discuss these matters further.
Stephen Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yesterday the BBC reported on expert analysis that's been submitted to the Transition Board, indicating that cutting 2,800 directly employed Tata Steel employees could lead up to 9,500 additional job losses due to the huge number of contractors and subcontractors who are indirectly employed by Tata. So my question to the Secretary of State is this: when the government handed £500 million of taxpayers' money to Tata to do this deal, had they made a full assessment of the job losses, not just in terms of those who would lose their jobs who are directly employed by Tata, but also the vast number of jobs that will be lost through the supply chains and contractors?
The Honourable Gentleman will know that he and I both sit on the Tata Transition Board, which has a dedicated group to look at the welfare of contractors and supply chain partners, and we will make sure that we support those people as much as the direct employers of Tata.
Rob Butler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of the many benefits of Brexit has been our ability to take back control of our trade negotiations. CPTPP is one of the most exciting. So I wonder if the Minister could provide an update on the status of our accession to CPTPP.
Speaker, I'm delighted to be able to do so, and delighted of such an enthusiastic supporter of CPTPP, which is an enormous benefit to this country. The UK joining will take its share of global GDP from around 11% to just more than 15%. The UK will be the first country ever to exceed to CPTPP, which includes most of the fastest growing markets in the Asia-Pacific region, but also with the UK joining shows that it goes beyond the region. I think in terms of the accession, we're delighted that royal assent has been given to our own CPTPP Act, Mr. Speaker, and looking forward to UK ratification in the coming weeks. 3 of the 11 parties have ratified so far, Japan, Chile, and Singapore, and we look forward to further parties ratifying in the coming weeks to make progress on this extraordinary opportunity for this country.
We're Havant.
Mr. Speaker, just as well that you are keeping an eye on the order paper. I do apologise. Mr. Speaker, last year the EFRA Select Committee heard that a lack of coherent agri-trade policy, together with a complex set of import and export certification rules, is preventing rural businesses, especially food producers, to trade outside the UK. How is the Department going to support UK food producers to deal with complex trade red tape?
Mr. Speaker, I gave evidence in front of the DEFRA Select Committee just last week on this very issue with our Food and Agriculture Minister, the member for Sherwood. We put in a huge amount of resources. We have a number of commissioners and trade support people around European Union countries and around the world in promoting agri-food exports. And I might just add to that, Mr. Speaker, that we also have a record level of services exports to the EU, some of which will be in the agriculture sector as well. So we have actually, contrary to her constant doom and gloom that she brings to this question time every 5 weeks, Mr. Speaker, we do have a very good story to tell about the successes of the United Kingdom when it comes to trade.
Dugan.
Speaker, Scottish salmon is just one of the Scottish businesses which serves to prop up the failing UK economy. Yet trade organisation Salmon Scotland revealed recently that the salmon industry in Scotland is losing £100 million a year in trade with the EU, and that since 2019 that's amounted to a 17% drop in trade. What message does the Secretary of State have for this business in Scotland, where all businesses and 2/3 of the electorate rejected this hard Tory Brexit?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we hear this from the SNP all the time, opposing everything in terms of UK trade agreements. And it's actually Scottish goods that benefit from so many of these trade agreements that we have negotiated. Like, for example, whisky when it comes to the Australia and New Zealand deals. Like, for example, coming deal, we hope, with India. All of these deals, Mr. Speaker, benefit Scottish goods in particular. Yet the SNP have opposed or abstained on every single trade deal that's ever been done by either this country or by the European Union. He knows it's true. They've abstained on Japan, they've abstained on Singapore, they're against Canada, against South Africa, against Korea, against Australia, against New Zealand, and even failed to show up on the Ukraine agreement, Mr. Speaker. It is a woeful record when it comes to supporting Scotland from the SNP.
Jones.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. What action is the government taking to strengthen critical supply chains?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government launched its critical supply chain strategy earlier this year, and I chaired the Critical Imports Council last month. We're bringing together 23 organisations to make sure that our supply chains are robust, and I look forward to the honourable gentleman's input into that.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The village of Kirkliston in my community recently became the latest to lose its post office. There have been a whole series of them. And that community is not isolated, but it's not in the centre of Edinburgh. There's no alternative. So, as I say, it's one of a series. So can the Minister tell us what the government is going to do to try to halt this decline in post offices?
Well, can I thank her for a question? I said earlier, to a response to an earlier question, we do put £50 million in to support the uncommercial parts of the network. I'm sorry to hear the post office that she mentioned has closed. Very happy to meet with her to see what we can do to make sure there's a local post office. There are network access requirements on the post office. 99% of the population must be within 3 miles of a post office. That's not the case in her area. Very happy to do what I can to make sure that it is rectified.
Kevin Brennan.
Mr Speaker, when the Trade Minister bragged to my honourable friend from the Rhondda earlier that his trade envoys had to have a qualification of discretion and diplomacy, did he have in mind the former trade envoy to Colombia, the member for Fylde?
Oh, sorry. I think if the opposition want to make an accusation, they should go ahead and do so, rather than this playground game that they're playing, which is insulting to every single trade envoy on both sides of the House who are delivering for this country.
Forward. Alan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. GRE Limited is a highly successful company in Willand. It already exports £1 million of engineering business to South Korea every year. It's done so for the last 6 years. The Managing Director, Richard Booth, let me know that exporting to Korea is already very straightforward. By contrast, getting parts in from Europe has become a real headache. Rather than fretting about a free trade agreement with Korea, how is the government monitoring additional red tape after having left the European single market?
Mr Speaker, we have the most comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU, more than with every other country in the world. So that should not be the reason why there will be difficulties in bringing in components. If he's got something specific that we can look at, I'm very happy to take a look. But we have been doing everything to ensure that trade in auto in particular continues to boom, and it is booming. We were able to stop the issue with rules of origin, which was going to have a deadline at the end of this year. We continue to do so. But in terms of which specific components are having trouble getting across the border, I would need a little bit more detail in order to provide him with an answer. But it is not about leaving the EU.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and good morning. Mr Speaker, India is the second largest market for Scottish whisky in the world, making it an extremely important market for the Scottish economy. Currently, whisky exported to India has a 150% import tariff placed on it. Ensure that any trade deal that is signed with India makes sure that tariff is reduced.
Well, Mr Speaker, we are engaged. It is a live negotiation with India at the moment. He wouldn't expect me to comment on the progress of a live negotiation. It's also obviously in the pre-election period in India as well. But I can tell him that Scotch whisky tariffs are very much part of that negotiation. Everybody knows that is one of the key UK objectives. Can I just perhaps add, Mr Speaker, if we do get a good deal on Scotch whisky, I would be looking forward for the first time in the SNP actually voting for a trade deal with India if we got that good deal.
Sir Michael Ellis.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that it would be odd and inappropriate for the United Kingdom to impose any form of arms embargo against Israel when His Majesty's armed forces are in the region and working with Israel to provide humanitarian support? And the UK would expect Israel to help in the protection of His Majesty's forces.
My right honourable friend makes a very good point, and I think the Prime Minister himself addressed this issue yesterday. I know that there's a lot of interest in terms of arms exports to Israel. Yesterday, my entire department was blockaded by protesters, meaning that the civil servants who needed to get to work were unable to do so. The government continues to monitor closely the situation in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. All export licence applications are assessed on a case-by-case basis against the strategic export licensing criteria, and the government takes its defence export responsibilities extremely seriously and operates some of the most robust export controls in the world.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could the Secretary of State explain what she is doing to help businesses in my constituency that have difficulties because we don't have the skills to increase the business? They can't expand because they're lacking some of the skills. Could she explain what she's doing to help this skills shortage?
Well, can I thank you for the question and being a champion for businesses in our constituency. We are putting £3.8 billion into skills training for people who work for the businesses, which is very important, but also improving skills in terms of the entrepreneurs, business owners themselves. Through our Help to Go management programme, you can find it on the Help to Go website, which is like a 12-week mini MBA, 90% funded by the government, but also our new Help to Go Management Essentials, totally free, 2 hours of online training for aspirant new business owners.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State tell us about the UK supply of cyber security professionals and if a lot of this work is now being offshored?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid I don't have the details to answer that question. On the face of it, given the information that I would have, it's not something that I've heard before, but we can write back with more information, but it doesn't sound like that's something that is the case.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency of Gower, we have the fantastic company Selwyn's that their seafood is absolutely first class, and they export a lot. And I just wondered, what's the current assessment of the government on the export of seafood and cockles for the Welsh market?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you for her question and her interest in the sector. We meet regularly with the UK seafood sector. It's a really important sector. It can be often subject to very high tariffs from foreign markets, but we know it's one of the sectors where the UK quality in particular really shines through and really comes through. It's a key part of many of our current trade negotiations, so I would say urge her to watch this space, and we're always happy to meet with the company concerned, but I can reassure that when it comes to seafood exports, the Department for Business and Trade is constantly engaged, both on a trade policy basis and in terms of the support that we give our exporters.
Right, we'll let the front benches clear.